Hello and welcome back to One Piece of Insight. In today's video, I will be sharing my target prices for purchasing certain popular cards. As most of you have likely seen, prices have been falling across the One Piece TCG market, and there's an expression that says, don't try to catch a falling knife, which means that because we don't know how low prices are going to go, if we buy while prices are falling, there's a chance that they might fall further, which can cause losses for us. While that is generally good advice, one thing that we can do in a market when we can't predict how far they're going to fall is to mentally prepare ourselves of what we are willing to pay for specific cards should they cross specific thresholds. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at 10 different popular cards to set my targets for what a 4-star buy would look like and what a 5-star buy would look like. So with that, let's jump right into the cards. First up, we have OP13 booster boxes. Now, for those who weren't tracking, this box was $700 just a couple weeks ago. But because there have been announcements that there will be reprints for OP13 and EBO3, prices have fallen almost $200. I do think that $500, frankly, is a reasonable price to pay for this, given how much it's already falling. So that would be sort of my 3-star price. But given the reprints, I think that I'm actually targeting around $400 for a 4-star price and $300 for a 5-star price. Anything under $400 I think is a very good deal, and anything under $300 I think that's a great deal. I'm not going to talk about EBO3 because I talked about that in the previous video, but my target for that is $250 for a 5-star and $300 for a 4-star. So moving on to the next one, we have the Zoro SP from OP14. I know I've talked about this many times. The first time I talked about this card, it was around $1,000. Then someone in the comments said it was going to go up to $1,400, which they were right about. It did go up that high. Now it's back down to around a little bit less than $1,000. I'm still not a buyer at $1,000. $1,000 is not a psychotic price to pay if you really, really want this and you're sort of risk averse and willing to pay extra. I do think it's likely to continue to fall. And so for 4 stars, I'm actually targeting $800. And for 5 stars, I'm targeting $600. So if it gets to 8, there's a decent chance I'll pick it up there. If it looks like it might fall further to 6, that's where I would make my move. So moving on to the next card, we have Gum Gum Giant. This card has actually not fallen that much. It was probably around $800 at its peak. It can now be had for around $700. As I said in previous videos, I think this is one of the most iconic cards that have been printed so far. I think it's a fairly rare card. So for that reason, it's one that I really want to add to my collection. Again, I think that this is not a psychotic price at this point, but I would be looking for it to go further. For me, a 4-star price on this is $600, with a 5-star price being $500. So moving on to our next card, we have the Tony Chopper manga from EBO1. We actually just talked about this in our previous video where we looked at the rarity of cards from OPO1 to OPO5 and EBO1. And what I discovered in that analysis is that this likely has the lowest population of any card in any one of those sets. And yet, despite that, from a price perspective, it's not significantly higher than most of those other cards. Now, I recognize that it is Chopper. It's not like a Gear 5 Luffy, which obviously is going to be much more expensive, or the Oda Signature, which is going to be much more expensive, even though there were more of them. But I do think if we're comparing this to other, B-plus tier characters on manga cards, this has the potential to be relatively reasonable given its scarcity, should it fall. Again, I think at this price, around $3,000, I would probably give it 3 stars. I would be looking for it to fall further before I would seriously consider picking one up. For me, a 4-star price on this one is actually $2,500, and a 5-star price would be around $2,200. How likely is it that it falls to $2,500? I'm not sure, but, in my opinion, I'm looking at like the Zoro manga to say, I think Zoro is a more popular character. That's currently going for, $2,300, $2,500. But the Chopper is significantly more rare than the Zoro. So in some sense, those might even out a little bit. So that's sort of where I'm getting my price targets for that. So moving on to Sealed, we have OPO9 Booster Box. Now, at its peak, this one was, again, fairly close to $700. It now can be had for around $550. Unlike OP13, where there's a very clear reason why the prices have gone down because of the reprints that are going to be coming. OP09 falling this much doesn't seem to be correlated with reprints at all. It just seems to be correlated with people being skeptical of the market and a natural price correction. So for that reason, I actually think this is a better buy than OP13. I actually think, and this may not be a popular opinion, I think OP09 is a better set than OP13 is. I think the Gold Roger manga is going to hold up better long term than the Red Luffy manga. I just think it's going to be a more iconic card. I also think that the second tier cards in OP09 are far better. The Luffy wanted poster and all the wanted posters in general, I think are fantastic. You have the Boa and the Nami SPs that are almost $1,000 cards at this point. And so for that reason, I actually think OP09 is a better set than OP13. And the fact that it's older, probably has a smaller print run, and is less likely to get reprinted, I would be paying more for OP09 than I would be paying for OP13. And so for that reason, I actually think it's a decent buy at this point, but I'm going to go ahead and say a 4-star price for this would be $500. And if it falls below $400, I would be calling that a 5-star price, where I would be wanting to pick up at least a box. So next up, in looking at sealed, we have EBO2. EBO2 at its peak was around $630, $650. It now can be had for a little over $500. Again, I think this is a pretty good deal for a couple reasons. Number one, we know that the EBs are scarce. I don't yet know how scarce EBO2 is relative to EBO1, but in the analysis we did of EBO1, we found that EBO1 was significantly rarer than the other sets that were printed in a similar time frame. So even if there is more EBO2 than there is of EBO1, I still anticipate that it's likely to be rarer than most of the other sets that were printed in the same time frame. I also think there's a lot of value in these boxes. The gold leaders are extremely rare, and so if you pull a good one, there's a lot of value in that. Even if you don't pull a good one, those are still selling for, high 3, low 4 figures, so there's value there. But in particular, I think that the Gear 2 manga Luffy is one of the best mangas that's ever been printed. And so if that proves to have a low print run compared to other mangas, I think that can become like an extraordinarily expensive card over time. And so for that reason, I really like this set. I think it's pretty unique. And so at only $500 compared to around the $900 that EBO1 is going for, given that this set has much better cards than that, even if it ends up having a larger print run, I think this is a pretty reasonable price for this box. So I would go ahead and say that $500 is a 4-star price, and that if it falls to $400, I would consider that to be a 5-star price. So again, treating this very similar to OP09. So moving on, we have the Luffy English version 2nd anniversary set promo card. So this is not the leader that's currently going for around $450 that's very popular. This is the individual character card in the set. I actually think that this card is a little bit slept on. I think the art is really, really cool. We talked about Gum Gum Giant earlier and how that is, a $700 card. Here we have a giant Luffy fighting against Kaido. So the art, I think, is really iconic. And this card at its peak was around $150 and now can be had for around $90. I think this is already a pretty strong deal. I probably would put this in, either the high 3 or the low 4-star category already. And so I would feel comfortable picking up at this point. I actually already have one, which is the only reason I'm not picking one up. But I think that a good target 4-star price that's nice and round is $90. And if it gets down to $60, I would be considering that to be a 5-star price. I really like this card long term. It's not a super rare card, but there also aren't a ton of them. We've had around 908 sales over the last year, which is a little bit below what you would typically expect for like an SP type of card. Okay, moving on, we have the Bandai Card Fest 25-26 Luffy promo card. So for those who don't know, Bandai Card Fest, I believe, just ended in Las Vegas. And so while this card was originally released at an earlier event, it was re-released again for Bandai Card Fest in Vegas. And so that's why you'll see such a rapid change in the price. So at its peak, this card was $260, almost $275, and now you can buy them for around $82. Now, I'll be honest, this is not my favorite art. I kind of felt that this arc was a little bit odd. It wasn't my favorite. So I don't know that I'm rushing to pick this up, but I do think that if you like this card, this is probably the intersection of when demand is sort of down because it's focused on other things, but at the same time supply is up because a lot of people just picked up this card and are looking to sell it. So I think if you are looking to get this card, this is probably the right time to do it. So again, around $80 for me, that's a 4-star price. If it gets down to around $50. Even I would probably consider picking it up. I would consider that to be a 5-star price. Next up, we have the Zoro from Event Pack Volume 3. This is not a super rare card, but again, it's not super common either. We've had around 920 that have been sold over the last year. At its peak, this card was selling for, $35 to $40. I actually considered buying this around $40 because I thought it was a really, really interesting piece of art. But when I saw that this fell to $23, I actually did pick one of these up. I think this is a really good value for what it is. So, at $25, I would consider this to be a 4-star card. If it got down to $15, I would consider this to be a 5-star card. I'm personally just a fan of the artwork, so if you like it, pick it up. If you don't, I don't think this is going to be like, a crazy card long term. I just think it's cool for what it costs. So a card that I actually do really like long term is this Nami Illustration Box Volume 1. So the first thing that has to be said about this is there are a lot of these. So over the last year, there have been almost 6,000 sales, which is, 5 to 6 times what you would expect for like an SP level rarity card. So this is a quite common card. Now that said, I do think the art is very iconic, and I do think that if 5 years from now, the population of people who are in the game has grown significantly, while it's not a rare card now, it will become a more rare card, and I think it is a very desirable card. Peach Momoko art is very popular. I think this is a really sort of compelling image of Nami compared to a lot of other ones, and I think at around $16, this is still quite affordable. This was, at its peak, was trading for around $30. At half of where it was, I already consider this to be a 4-star price at around $20. At $15, if it gets down to like $12, I would call it a 5-star price. I actually already have like 7 of these. That's the only reason I'm not buying more. But I like this card long term. I think this is just a great card to have in your collection, even if you're not thinking about selling it in the future. Another thing I will note about this card is that it's actually really hard to grade. So if you find one in really clean condition, I think in the future there could be a market for sort of the premium quality versions of these cards, but that's just entirely speculative on my part. All right, so those are 10 cards, but I did want to throw in 2 bonus cards that I think are really cool and are really cheap. This first one here, we have the Yamato from the Best Selection Volume 4. This card is around $10. It's never been that much more expensive than that. At its peak, it was, around $12. So I don't think this is like a screaming deal from a price perspective. I just think this art is really, really cool. I think for $10, if you're new to the game, if you don't have a tremendous amount of money to spend, but you want to pick up some cool cards, I just think this is a really cool card to have for, $10, $11. The same thing with our last card, which is the Ace from Premium Collection Best Selection Volume 3. Again, this is around a $10 card. At its peak, this one was a little more expensive. It was around $18. So the fact that it's down about 50%, I do think makes it a pretty good buy. But mostly, I just think the art on this card is really cool. I think that if you wanted this quality art on another card, in most cases, you would be paying more money for it. So I thought that $10 for this was a pretty good value. I will also say, too, that there are, 2,357 that have sold over the last year. So again, it's not a super rare card. I don't think that it's going to be like an amazing value long term. I just think that if you're looking to pick up some cool cards and not spend a ton of money, this is one that I might be targeting as well. So that's all I have for you today. Hopefully that was helpful. I appreciate you all tuning in. Thanks so much for the continued support. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.